It is good that we come back into God's house. I would ask you to remember something. I just got a phone call from one of the fire chiefs here in Leesville, and there is a major fire, structure fire. We've already burned a couple trailers out on 1211. They've activated the complete fire brigades for that area. So I know I've got my men in danger down there. It's on Highway 1211 down near somewhere near the Jackson Chapel. I don't know exactly where it's located, but let's keep them in our thoughts as they're abandoned that at this time. I wanted you to go with me tonight to the book of Job. Job chapter 31 is where we're going. Last week I asked the question, what man would you think about forgiveness? And someone said, you ought to be preaching on Job. He was a forgiving man. And I got to thinking about studying Job. And I got to think about Job being a worthy man. You know, Proverbs 31 talks about a worthy woman. One had all the attributes she had. And I began to think and mull over my mind a little bit about the character of Job. We automatically think about Job being that which is a patient man. In Job chapter 1 and verse 1, he said he was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. That, in my mind, has got me to thinking about the attributes of Job as a worthy man. And I began to think about it and study it. So we're going to look at the idea of Job tonight. He is certainly one who can be described as upright. He is one who can be described as trusting God. But he was also very human in that he asked questions. He posed questions why. He did not lose his faith. He did not turn to the temptations that was put before him, succumb to the trials and the tribulations that Satan had put before him. And as I read the book of Job, I thought about Job 31. And here again, it's in my mind anyway, a chapter that describes Job as a worthy man. We're going to read all 40 verses in succession so that we can think about it. So we'll read Job chapter 31, and we're going to begin in verse 1. I have made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I look upon a young woman? For what is the allotment of God from above, and the inheritance of the Almighty from on high? Is it not destruction for the wicked, and disaster for the works of iniquity? Does he not see my ways and count all of my steps? If I had walked with a falsehood, or if my foot is hastened to deceit, let me be weighed on honest scales, that God may know my integrity. If my step is turned from the way, or my heart walk after mine eyes, or if the spot appears to my hands, then let me sow and another eat. Yes, let my harvest be rooted out. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or if I've lurked at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind for another, and let another bow down over her. For that would be wickedness. Yes, it would be iniquity, deserving of judgment. For that would be a fire that consumes to destruction, and would root out all of mine increase. If I have despised the cause of my male or female servant, when they complained against me, what then should I do when God rises up? When he punishes, how should I answer him? Did not he who made me in the womb make them? Did not the same one fashion us in the womb? If I have kept the poor from their desires, or caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or eaten my morsel by myself so that the fatherless could not eat of it, but with my youth I reared him as a father, and in my mother's womb I guided the widow. And from my mother's womb I've guided the widow. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or any poor man without clothing, if his heart has not blessed me, or if he has not warned me with the fleece of my sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless, when I saw I had help in the gate, then let mine arm fall from my shoulder. Let my arm be torn from the socket, for destruction from God is a terror to me, and because of his magnificence I cannot endure. If I have made my gold hope, or said to find gold, you are my confidence. If I have rejoiced because my wealth was great, and because my hand had gained much. If I had observed the sun when it shines, or the moon moving in its brightness, so that my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand. This would also be an iniquity deserving of judgment, for I would have denied God who is above. If I have rejoiced at the destruction of him who hated me, or lifted myself up when evil found me, indeed I have not allowed my mouth to sin by asking for a curse of his soul. If the men of my tent have not said, who is there that has not been satisfied with his meat? But no sojourner had to lodge in the street, for I have opened my doors to the traveler. If I have given my transgressions as Adam, by hiding my iniquity in my bosom, because I feared the great multitude and dreaded the contempt of families, so that I kept silence and did not go out to the door, or that I had one to hear me. Here is my mark. Oh, that the Almighty would answer me, that my prosecutor had written a book. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder and bind it on me like a crown. I would declare to him the number of my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. If my land cries out against me, and its furrows weep together, if I've eaten its fruit without money, or caused its owners to lose their lives, then let the thistles grow instead of wheat, and weeds instead of barley. The words of Job ended. Now, as I thought about those things, I broke that chapter down into several things. I think there's 8 or 10 of them. But I want you to think about Job. The first thing that he brings up in this chapter is moral integrity, morality, purity. He says in verse 1, he says, I've made a covenant with mine eyes. I have agreed that I will not look upon a young woman. I will not lust. I will control the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye. I will not have that type of desire. You know, you think in Philippians, the 4th chapter, verse 8, Paul tells us whatsoever things are honest and true and just. Think on these things. I think Job had directed his mind in the right direction. He said, I have made a covenant with mine eyes. I have agreed within myself. And if you look at this chapter, and you could call this the if chapter. If I've done this, then this. If I've done this. And he breaks down many, many things. If I am guilty of this, Lord, let the punishment come to me. One thing this worthy man Job knew, he knew about God's justice. He knew about God's fairness, if you would, and he trusted in that fairness. He trusted in the idea of it. He kept himself under control. Whether it was his working with his servants, whether or not it was working with his family or his wife, or those he fed, those sojourners, he was under control, self-control. That is an attribute today that a worthy person must have. Having the ability, if you would, to control my emotions, having the ability to control my anger, my actions, my attitude. Job, if anyone, had the right, and I believe he had that right, and that's my opinion. Look at what it cost Job. It cost him everything. He was blameless, and he was upright, and he did all of these things. He lost his kids. He lost his wife. He lost his possessions. He was in such a bad shape that his friends come and sat a whole week with him and didn't say a word to him. Job was able to take all of these things into consideration. Look at verse 3. Is it not destruction for the wicked and disaster for the workers of iniquity? If you have the lack of self-control, and I think in this context of these, he's talking about moral purity. He's talking about lust of the flesh. He's talking about inordinate desires. He says, if you can't control that, it's a disaster. I want to draw this conclusion from that verse. The lack of self-control for us today is disastrous. No matter where we're at, if we can't control our physical appetite, if we can't control our desires, if we can't control our attitudes, then we're opening ourselves up to the door of temptation. And I think that's one thing that Job did in this context of the entire book of Job, is he was able to practice that which was self-control. And I like verse 6. I've always liked that verse. Let me be tried on honest scales. This worthy man of Job was willing to put himself against the scales of God's justice. Let me be weighed on God's scales. We know what the counterweight is. We know what God expects us to be. Tonight, if my life was weighed against God's scales of justice, would it come up with a fair measurement? Absolutely. I want you to know something. God's scales are fair. God's justice is fair. God respecteth the person of no man. Job makes this argument in this particular chapter. He says, whether or not I was raised or guided, and then as if I like anything, any poor man without cover, any heart, God, he recognized the equality. He said, I was born just like the poor man was. I was conceived just like, we were all just alike. Job understood fairness. And if we will honestly weigh ourselves on God's justice, God's scales are fair. There is no out of balance. God's word is complete. The problem comes when we put our life on the other side of the scale. When we put our world on the other side and comparing it, are we coming up lacking? Are we coming up short? Job here, he says, I saw all of these things. I've done all of these things. I want to be weighed on honest scales that God may know my integrity. Now, we could spend the rest of the lesson talking about the word integrity. That's one thing that's missing in many places today in our world is integrity. Just do what you've got to do and get by. If nobody catches you, it's okay. That's kind of the attitude of the world. Just do whatever you got to do to make it go away and it'll be all right. Folks, there's a higher power. There's a higher being that's demanding our integrity, our uprightness, our fairness, our loyalty, our love. Integrity. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Moral integrity. He thinks about that. He notices in this, look at verse 7. If my step is turned from the way, and my heart walked after mine eyes, or aspired, then let me sow another eat. If I've done this, let me suffer the consequences. Job understood the fairness of God's scales. You think about the justice in there. I'm going to use an extension on verses 9 and 10. Job says, if I have laid my lust, if I've looked at my neighbor's wife, if my heart has been enticed by a woman, or I've lurked at my neighbor's gate, then let my wife grind for another. If you go back to that context, I believe he talks about it from the book of Deuteronomy, in the fact that Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 30, you shall betroth a wife, but another man shall lie with her. You shall build a house, but you shall not dwell in it. You shall plant a vineyard, and you shall not gather its grapes. That was the foundation of the Old Testament law that I think Job understood. Job understood the sanctity of the marriage as he was had integrity with it. And he valued that. He understood the price he would pay. Because in verse 11 he says, for that would be wickedness. Yes, it should be iniquity, deserving of judgment. Deserving of judgment. Job understood God's scales, but Job also understood God's judgment. And it was fair judgment. I can't judge your heart. You can't judge my heart. But God knows the heart of all of us. And God knows that judgment. And I think that's one thing in the book of Job. If you look at the entire story of Job, the integrity of Job, the life of Job, the disasters that happened to Job, the advice of Job's friends that came to him to work with him, you look at the whole thing. Job understood God's judgment was fair. And God makes no mistakes. I don't understand all the things that happened to Job and the questions that he asked. He asked questions of God before it, but then he understood. He understood that. Let's look at verse 13. I want to look at verse 13 through 23 in the context there. He's talking about if I've despised the curse of my male or female servant when they complained against me. Verse 16, if I have kept the poor from their desire. Verse 19, if I've seen any black of perish. If I've seen, verse 20, his heart has not been blessed by me. Job understood the requirement to be kind. Job says, whether or not I have loved my servants, whether or not I have desired any of these that are fatherless, or those that are homeless, or those that are in need, if I have held back my compassion, if I've held back my generosity, if I've held back my hospitality, then it is worthy of my being judged. Job was one that was kind. He was characteristic by his love of fellow man. You look at what he says. He made us all alike. Did he not make me in the womb also? Verse 15. Did the same one fashion us in the womb? We were all created equal. Whether Job came out as Job or Job's servant. Folks, we're all created equal. Job was a man that was not prejudicial. He was not prejudiced. He was not, he didn't understand, he valued it. The value of my servant, the value of the homeless, the value of the man who's hungry. We all deserve the same thing. Job was kind. Job was hospitable. Job understood fairness, just like he understood God's justice. That's the reason I said he was a worthy man. Can we be like Job? Can we open our compassion and our hospitality and our generosity to those that are the servants, those that are the poor? Verse 16, or those that are needing help. If a man asks us of something, can we not fulfill it? Job met the needs of the day. And I want you to know something. I believe, now here again, you can study, we can talk about it. Job was a very wealthy man prior to the devil tempting him, prior to these things happening. Job didn't become a compassionate, kind individual after this stuff happened. That was Job's life before it happened. Job was kind. This is the reason in Job 1 and verse 1, he was blameless, he was upright, he's one who feared God. These marks of identity of this worthy man is one that began long before the book of Job did. His fairness to his wife, it began when he married her. The integrity of raising his kids, it began when they were still at home. We pick up the story of Job's life when the devil comes to him and tries us. We notice when I believe the characteristics of this worthy man is one that had been there throughout his life. He carried with it throughout it. He was a caring individual, hospitality in many ways. I want you let's skip down throughout it. If you get a chance this week, read some of the if statements. If I've done this, then I'm worthy. I deserve this. If I deserve this, if I've done this, then I'm worthy of this. Look at the if statements in this chapter. Let's look down in verse 29. If I have rejoiced at the destruction of him who hated me, or lifted myself up when evil found him. Indeed, I have not allowed my mouth to sin, but by asking for a curse of his evil. Job didn't try to get even. Job says, I'm going to love your enemy. Be kind to your enemy. In so doing, you shall, what's the Bible say? Coals of fire upon his head. Folks, that's hard to do. Job was, yes, he was a forgiving man. Yes, he was a patient man. Yes, he was a fair man. But he did not carry a vindictive attitude. He said, if I have found the one, if I've rejoiced in him, somebody done something bad to Job, said, oh, look, see what happened to him? He got what he deserved. That's not the attitude Job had. Job had the attitude of fairness. He was not vindictive. He said, if I rejoice in the destruction of him who hated me, or lift myself up even when found him, if I kind of gloat when old Burnell done me bad, and I see Burnell get in trouble, I kind of walk by and sneer at him and say, oh, look what happened to Burnell, Ricky. God got even with him. That's not Job's attitude. Job's attitude was, I'm not going to rejoice at the evil becoming someone else, the hard will. He was not vindictive. He was concerned with the care of those around him. In verse 31, if the men of my tent was not satisfied with their meat, if the sojourner had to lodge in the street and opened not his, he was hospitable. He was hospitality. Let us show hospitality one to another. The strangers that we meet, folks, we meet them every day. Be honest with yourself. We meet people every day that's in need. No, we can't expect to satisfy the needs of society. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we're going to be the welfare society for every homeless case that comes along. But when we have opportunity, what does Paul tell us? Let us do good, therefore, to all people, especially the household of faith, as we have opportunity. I believe, and here again, this is Mandy's word on Job chapter 30. Job was an opportunist. He saw the opportunity to help, and he answered that call. He saw the opportunity to feed those that were hungry, even in his own household, or those that were naked, or those that were destitute. He was in all of those things. He says in that context, if I have done all, my sojourners have been in the street, if I've opened my doors to the traveler, if I've covered my transgressions out by hiding my iniquity in my bosom, because I fear the great multitude and dread the contempt of families, so that I kept silent and did not go out of the door? Oh, that I had one to hear. Here is my mark. Oh, that the Almighty would answer me, that my prosecutor might have written a book. The fairness of Job. I want you to think about his hospitality. I want you to think about something else. The sincerity of Job. We think about Job's patience, Job's sincerity, the fairness, the sincerity, the truth. Job was the same with everybody. The sincerity that Job practiced. Doesn't that teach us a great lesson today? Sincerity of heart. Not double-minded. What is it? James chapter 1. A double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. James chapter 1, I believe the context verse 6, 7, and 8 in that neighborhood. Job practiced sincerity, integrity, honesty, compassion, hospitality. Do you see this worthy man? I've never thought about this particular chapter at a man's funeral. Sometimes when we call it preach a woman's funeral, we immediately think about Proverbs 31. But if when I have left this earth, they can say that he was a Job, what a compliment that would be. One that feared God, one that walked with integrity, one that walked with simplicity of mind, one that walked with honesty of heart, one that was humble, one that felt the needs of humanity. Folks, there's something we all can do to make this world a better place. And I think that's kind of what Job did. Whether it was his servants or those that he met that was in need. Job had integrity. He was a man of integrity. He was sincere. But he was also a good steward. Now, you think about all the blessings Job had. He was a good steward. He used the blessings of God to its fullness. You think about all of the things that's happening, and I'll not read it in its entirety. But chapter 32. So the three men ceased answering Job because his righteousness was in his own eyes. Job knew his condition. Job knew where he stood. And Job was honest enough to recognize his condition. Yes, he had questions. Yes, he had questions. But yes, he had faith in God. I would say that's the last thought on the idea of this. Job was faithful, even under trial. Job was faithful, even under trials. How do we do today? How do we compare to that? When we are faced with adversity, when we're faced with heartache, when we're faced with the actions of others, when we're faced with pain of our own doing, how do we handle heartache? Job said, I'll cast my cares upon him because he cares for me. You go and you read the book of Job, and you read all of the answers and the discussions of the friends back and forth with him. But then you turn over to chapter 40 of Job 40. Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? He who rebukes God, let him answer it. Then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I've spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. Now you go back and I'll let you in your Bible study read Job chapter 40. How many and how great of lesson we could learn tonight to prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Hebrews 9 and verse 27. It's appointed a man once to die, and after that, the judgment. We shall all stand before him, give account of things done in this body, whether they be good or whether they be bad. Folks, God's going to ask the questions, and we're going to give the answers. Job proved that to be faithful. Job humbled himself there. I want you to look at that in Job chapter 42 and verse 2. Job chapter 42 and verse 2. I know, let's pick up in verse 41. 42 and verse 1. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You ask, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand. Things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I will question you, and you shall answer me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I will hire myself and repent in dust and ashes. And it was after the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, and he goes into the final judgment. And I want you to think about Job, the last verse, chapter 42 and verse 17. Well, let's pick up early. Pick up verse 12. When all the adversity had happened, the worthy man at the end of his life, Job chapter 42 and verse 12. Now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 female donkeys. He had also 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he called the name of the first Jeremiah, the name of the second, and he named them there. In all the land were found no women so beautiful as the daughters of Job, and their father getting inheritance among their brethren. That's a unique situation. And this Job lived 140 years and saw his children and his grandchildren for 4 generations. The greatest epitaph of Job. The last verse. So Job died old and full of days. Full of days. A worthy man. Yes, Job was patient. Job may have been recognized and praised, but all of these things, we can learn from him. We can learn from his life. As I've been thinking about Bible characters, I've talked about Moses, I've talked about Joseph, and we're talking about Job tonight. Some of these I'd read about and thought about them. But the character studies, can we be like Job? Can we be the virtuous woman, if you're a female, like the virtuous woman? I'm going to touch on it, and I won't get too far out in the outline. But the virtuous woman was married to a good man. He was one that was honored in the gates. The virtuous woman had a good family. Folks, Job had a good family. He had grandchildren, and he got to see them. Oh, what a blessing that is. There's nothing like the life of a grandchild, is there, Pat? You think about it. Job lived full, and he died of an old age, content, because he was a worthy man. Are you worthy tonight? Job understood God. He understood faith. He understood kindness. He understood obedience. Job was a faithful man. He questioned God. He had questions, but God had answers. If you have questions in your life tonight, God has the answers for them. You need to make it right with God in some way. There's no better time than right now. Witness this in some way, being a worthy person. Won't you come as we sing the song that's been selected?